This conference will now be recorded.
So good afternoon, everyone. This is Rebecca Smith-Aldridge. I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-Hudson Library System, and we're so pleased to have you here with us today. You've actually broken record attendances for our webinars here at Mid-Hudson. We actually sold out this event in about 24 hours and have a waiting list. So we've actually negotiated for new software that wasn't quite ready for today, but will be for the next time we do this to make sure we can accommodate everyone next time. But for today, you've received a seat here today for the live recording of the webinar. I want to thank everyone who has sent questions in advance. We're going to make sure we cover the majority of those and let you know where to get information on the ones we couldn't cover today. We will also be looking at the chat box throughout the day. So if you think we're not covering something that you were hoping was going to be covered, you can pop a question in the chat box, and Casey and I are going to do our best to watch that and make sure we get the answers to you that you're looking for. Before we get into the nitty-gritty answers to some of the questions that were sent in, I just wanted to start off by sharing that this is a post we used on social media about a week and a half ago. And just to start off today by acknowledging how challenging this situation is, both personally and professionally. I know you are struggling with many things, with your library trying to figure out many things. And what's really important for us right now is to make sure we understand that your library is not closed right now. The facility might be closed, but your library isn't. So when we think about, as we go through the answers and the issues that we're going through today, I just want to thank you for everything you've done over the past few weeks. I know it was likely unanticipated, some of the decisions you've had to make. You've had challenging conversations. You haven't had all the information you wish you had to make those decisions. I know how thoughtful you all are in the work you do on behalf of your library. So my goal here today is to make sure that you get the best information we have today. I am totally going to acknowledge we do not have answers for everything, but we are doing our best. So we're going to share our best thinking, our best information gathering that we've done today, because more than 300,000 people in the Hudson Valley rely on library services, and that didn't change just because the doors to your facility closed due to the pandemic. So I just want to put that out there and start off by saying thank you, because I know it hasn't been easy, but as we've been told over and over again, and we know to be true more than most, we're all in this together, and we're going to do our absolute best, because that's what's required of us in this moment. So I bet you've seen some of the newspaper coverage. We're seeing both national, state, and local coverage of the issue and how libraries are playing a role. This was an article from Wired Magazine, all the way to the Daily Freeman. We're hearing kudos for libraries. People are turning to libraries. We are still trusted institutions that people are turning to for help. So one of the big things we're going to talk to you today is how to best position your library to make sure your role as a valued community asset is still real and viable and accessible by the people that you serve. And our libraries are doing some very creative things. We're going to show you a bit of that, what's been going on across the system, but also from a governance angle, your role as a trustee to make sure that you've got the policies and procedures and answers in place that protect your library and serve your community as best you can. So today what we're going to do is a brief overview of Mid-Hudson services to make sure you're 100% clear on what Mid-Hudson is able to do for your library right now. We've been working closely with your director since day one of this emergency, both through our listservs, emails, phone calls, chat, text, and weekly director briefings. And we've still got work to do on that front, but we're doing our best. So we'll go over the Mid-Hudson services and what that looks like. We're going to give you an up-to-the-minute state budget update. I literally am getting text messages as I'm talking right now from the executive director of the New York Library Association, letting me know what's going on up in Albany. So we'll be able to give you that sense of what we're dealing with at that level. And then we're going to dive into those answers to the questions we've been getting. We've been tracking questions all along, and then we obviously solicited questions directly from you for today. So these are the categories we're going to do our best to cover in. We're going to show you where you can get more information to take a deeper dive on some of these things, and point out where there is not a complete set of answers for some things to make sure you know know that it's not just you, which I think we all appreciate right now as we harness that collective wisdom of the Mid-Hudson Library System and all the great people who help make library services possible in the Hudson Valley. So just to get started off here at Mid-Hudson, we are working very hard. While our major messages here are that we had to suspend delivery service and interlibrary loan, as it was not advisable to be moving items through the system from a public health perspective. It also became obvious that libraries being closed means that there's nothing to deliver to or from. We've also suspended in-person events and in-person consultations. So the date you see there of April 19th, that is aligned with the most recent date in the governor's executive orders related to closure. So we know that's a moving target. We've already had to change that date once, just as you've likely had to change your closure dates at your library. So we're watching very closely everything the governor says, all of the executive orders, as well as public health officials' information that we receive. So that date could change. Just as you know, the closure of your library may change. Many of our libraries are now saying until further notice instead of picking a date that may very well have to change again. So that clarity and communication is very important. And Mid-Hudson, we will not be saying until further notice because we really want people paying attention to the specific date. And we'll talk more about that towards the end of this session. But how we restart services, both at the system and at your library, that's going to take some logistical thinking. So we're going to point out some of the things we want everyone thinking about as we roll into that hopeful day. We've seen an incredible increase in requests for assistance from our libraries, and we are doing our best to keep up. Our technology operations ticket system, we've literally got double the number of requests that we normally get, but the staff has just done an awesome job. I know I'm biased, but I gotta say, they've been closing out almost every single ticket every single day, even with double that volume. So please know we're doing our best. If you think we've missed something, don't be afraid to nudge us and say, hey, did you miss this? We're doing our absolute best. Our staff is working from home just like yours is, and they weren't used to doing that either. So they've had to quickly set up and transition. And from what we can see, they're doing a very good job. We've gotten a lot of great feedback from our members. Professional development and continuing education, we are transitioning as quickly as possible, given that we don't have in-person events, but we know you still have needs. So our online offerings have been growing each week and to the point where we have almost daily Sierra webinars. We're doing events like this to keep people up to date with the information as it's changing from day to day, as well as leadership management programs and other things we know our directors need right now as things unveil itself. Consulting and development is in full swing. I've spoken to many of you as well as your directors over the past few weeks. And you know I love talking to you. It's been great to hear what you're dealing with to help us figure out how to support everyone. So you're not bothering us. If you reach out, please feel free. We're still answering email, answering phone messages as well as text messages if you need us on a short notice. So I hope you all know how to get in contact with me. And if not, you're going to know by the end of today. Communication among member libraries has been absolutely vital as directors share information and find out what the issues are throughout this period. This kind of collective hive mind that we've built here in Mid-Hudson is really paying off for us during this emergency. We've got some great leadership, not only at the system level amongst our board members, our staff, and our member library directors and trustees, as well as your staff. And we're trying to make sure everyone is able to communicate, share information, and get factual information that's really making a difference. So we've introduced a number of new services over the past few weeks. You're going to hear us talk about this resource page quite a bit. I encourage you to check it out. We're going to point out a couple of key things that are on there that we know you want to take a deeper dive on. So we've got support there for governance and administration of your library, for marketing your services online, for producing online programming and services. This is becoming a huge repository for the system as well as around the state. I heard from a couple of other systems thanking me for all the work our staff has done on this page. So we're doing our best to get timely updates to your directors as well as you, both through our listservs, productions of briefings such as this, as well as the weekly newsletter, and anything that can't wait until the weekly newsletter, we're issuing notices to our directors of that. And we're archiving those all on that resource page I mentioned if you want to go back and read through all of those. Always pay attention to dates on things during this period of time. Things are changing. Executive orders come out from the governor almost every day, and they do change things that we may have said a few weeks ago. So it's very important to pay attention to the date on information that you're taking a look at. So that's why we're doing weekly director briefings, because we know it's a lot of information that's been coming out unevenly. So we want to summarize things for directors on a weekly basis so they have the best information in hand to make good decisions and service choices on the face of what we're dealing with. We've also introduced some new programs. We know many libraries were not used to doing programming in an online environment. So we've got a special edition of our Programmers Forum for staff that do programming to share best practices and give a shout out to some of our libraries who have just been doing some fantastic work online, as well as a social media roundtable, as social media is becoming a really important point of communicating for people, perhaps a bit more so than it was a month ago. And we're also hosting online meetings for our county directors group so they can share information at the county level, which we found to be incredibly useful, not only from an information sharing perspective, but I think a social networking perspective to help directors get that support they need, because they're making a lot of big decisions in unusual circumstances, to say the least. We've spent a huge amount of energy and effort through the technology operations team here at Mid-Hudson, led by Lori Shedrick. She's instituted that new toolbar at the top of the online catalog to more quickly help our residents get to ebooks, e-magazines, online courses, learning a language, and very importantly, under the e-resources button, you'll find specific listings for every single library in the system, as some libraries have been able to offer even more than we can do system-wide. We've also got online registration forms for almost, I think we're up to 90% of our libraries now. Lori and her staff have created more than a dozen new online registration forms for libraries just in the past few days. We normally see about 4 or 5 residents of the Hudson Valley register for cards online. We are currently averaging about 100 new cards a day through these online forums. So if you're one of the very few libraries who haven't done this yet, we highly encourage it. Lori's also worked with vendors to make sure those temporary barcodes that come through the online registration form work with the maximum number of our products. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the technology operations team, because this forward-facing online presence has become so vital in the past few weeks. It's been a great lesson to us all, and I think the technology operations team here is doing their best to make sure your library is as viable as possible online to get your patrons in touch with the resources that we've all invested in on their behalf. Another huge effort from our library sustainability team has been creating pieces you can use on social media to get the word out about what we have. A lot of our products have names that don't do them justice. So we're working to fine tune some of the marketing pieces that you have access to and your staff has access to get the word out about what your library has to offer. So these are available both through our own Mid-Hudson social media channels, as well as that resources page we mentioned before. We see tons of share outs from our libraries to help get the word out about these things. So again, making sure people even know we have these things is the first step, and then getting them registered for a card and helping them get onboarded with these products are things our libraries are focused on right now. We'll talk a bit more about how libraries are doing that in a few minutes. So just again, this is something we'll say about 7 times during the hour, making sure you're tapped into this resource. midhudson.org/COVID-19 is that repository of the resources we are finding that are helpful to libraries. It's also a place where I'm going to point you for a couple of things for significant technical assistance on pretty complicated things that we're all trying to figure out. And we'll be updating that routinely with the help of the library sustainability team, which is led by Casey Conlon, who's helping us out with the tech support today. So state budget wise, this has been on everyone's mind. Your local library funding is very stable. It's been voter approved, if not negotiated for the year already with your municipality. So your local funding that comes through a secure and stable source is guaranteed, right, in this situation if it's been voter approved. Your fundraising dollars is something we're going to talk about today. That's going to need some new strategy to think about. And for some of you, that's a bigger deal than others of you. But the other huge component that makes your library possible today is the state funding that comes into the Mid-Hudson library system to create those backbone services that your library uses as a platform to deliver services locally. So the state funding makes up about 75% of the Mid-Hudson library system's budget, and that is translated and leveraged into services that help your library deliver services at the local level, from the Sierra software to the online catalog to the delivery system to the technical support you receive to the research we do on your behalf on tougher issues, to the continuing education that your staff benefits from, all of that hinges on what comes through the state budget right now. As we are all following the second wave of this crisis, the economic crisis, we're keeping a close eye on what the state budget looks like. And everyone is in the same boat, right? We all understand that revenues are going to be significantly down for the state due to the closure of businesses in our state. So watching what normally happens at this time, we are normally here on April 1st, the day the budget is legally due. It does look like there will be an on-time budget. Budget bills are literally being passed as we speak in different areas of the budget. So we saw the Senate has been taking the lead in passing budgets in leadership format. Some of those budget bills are coming through with legislation that's been negotiated with the other house, with the assembly as well. So right now we have no final numbers from the state budget, but what I can share is that there are very positive numbers for libraries coming out of the Senate at this time. The Senate has put forth $14 million for the state aid for construction program, and while that is significantly less than we saw last year, I think we can all acknowledge that any money at all invested in the library infrastructure right now is a very positive sign, that they feel libraries are valuable enough to make sure the limited funds they are going to have come to libraries. Now, the other big, huge thing we're watching is our operating aid. As we said, 75% of our operating aid comes from state funding. The Central Library Program, which underwrites many of the e-resources your library enjoys, comes from state funding. You get a check from the state called Local Library Services Aid, again, direct aid from the state. This is the number that we're all very concerned about. What will this look like? Preliminary numbers are far more positive than I think we have any right to expect, to be honest with you. We're seeing numbers that are perhaps closer in line to what the governor proposed in January, which is pretty good if you think about the amount of revenue they are losing through this process. The thing we all have to keep in mind is whatever that final number is, and hopefully we know by the end of today, that number can change. They have acknowledged the governor and his staff have the authority to make mid-year budget adjustments. So we are going to have to be extremely conservative at the system level on how funds are spent this year. So we are suspending funding on almost everything that isn't mission critical at this point in terms of keeping our staff paid and making sure our building is still running, even though we've got limited staff in that building. So we're going to ask for your patience and understanding as we work our way through this unprecedented situation with the state budget. Our board at the Mid-Hudson Library System is ready and waiting to do the work to figure this out. We've already been doing some planning and work to make sure we understand how to make sure the most critical services you need are not interrupted during this budgetary crisis. And it is a crisis. We don't know how long it will go on, as we all have been struggling with figuring that out over the past few weeks. But we do know is we've got a lot of good people working on the issue, and we're going to do the best we can on everyone's behalf as we move forward with as much input as we can from our stakeholders as we think through what the reality of the situation will mean for the Mid-Hudson Library System's budget. So not an easy time, but we ask for your understanding and patience and trust that we are doing our best on your behalf. We'll have an update for you as soon as we can. We know that the New York Library Association is working very hard on our behalf. They've been getting us updates all day since about 8 o'clock this morning. I've been getting messages from them. So as soon as we have final information, we'll certainly get that to you. As soon as we can wrap our minds around what that will mean from a service delivery standpoint from Mid-Hudson to your library, of course, that will be communicated in a timely manner. So we wanted to really spend the bulk of our time here today with these answers to the frequently asked questions that we know you're contending with right now. I think a lot of people have done some of their own legwork. Your directors have been attending the weekly briefings and getting good information to bring back to you. We've got a lot of information on the COVID-19 resources page from Mid-Hudson, but I think it always helps when you get information in a variety of formats. Hearing things from a secondhand line, from research you do yourself, all of that's great. I think it's good when we can confirm some of your understandings of what we have going on here today. So I want to start with the, I don't know if it's the most immediate thing, but it's certainly the thing we're getting the most questions from trustees about, which is the open meeting law. And I see so many names on the list here today of people who I know you've come to our trustee workshops. You've heard us talk about open meetings law for years and the best way to comply with the open meetings law. But on March 13th, the governor adjusted public officers law, which is actually where open meetings law sits, and adjusted it in reaction to the need for for physical distancing in the midst of this pandemic. So they actually suspended the in-public, in-person access to meetings component of open meetings law. So as you are all very familiar with, you are required to have open meetings in accessible locations where the public comes to attend and listen and watch you do the business of the library. So what they've done is suspended that in-public, in-person access. They are allowing you to do conference call and video conferencing meetings. However, the public still needs to have access to that conference call or video conference meeting. So again, the public has the ability to view or listen to such the proceeding in real time, and they also must be recorded and later transcribed. Now, big question we've gotten is, well, doesn't transcription just mean the minutes of the meeting? And the answer to that is no. Your minutes are not a transcription of the meeting. You do still have to do the minutes just like you always did, but there also needs to be a transcription. So we've been talking amongst ourselves and with the directors about what is the software that is best able to do that transcription for you. You should not expect that someone has to do a hand translation of this by a human. There's plenty of technological solutions that help you do that. Libraries have been testing those things out, and we're fine-tuning what the best ways are to do that. But please do know it says later transcribed. So if you don't have a perfect solution in place right now, that's okay. Get your meetings done as you need to. We know you've got business you need to get done. There's things that have to keep happening. There's policies that have to be passed. You should be meeting regularly, and if you need special meetings, you should be calling those. Please do respect, though, that the public notice part of public officers law has not been suspended. So you still do have to advertise your meetings, get them on your calendar on the library's website, make sure it's clear how the public can participate. And please understand that in the aftermath of this, these recordings and transcriptions will be what they call foilable, right? They will be requestable under the Freedom of Information law here in New York State. So you are going to have to figure out that transcription thing sooner rather than later. But again, that word later is key. If you don't have a solution today, that's okay. You can still meet as long as you can meet these other requirements of having the public attend your call or video conference, as well as recording what you're doing for later transcription. One of the other confusing things about the executive orders is that there are all these different dates embedded in them for all different purposes. So to clarify, this particular adjustment is in place until April 11th. Highly likely that date's going to be extended, and we will certainly let you know as soon as it is. It's, I think, safe to assume it will be suspended and you can keep operating this way for a few weeks after that. But for now, it's in effect until April 11th. And again, if that changes, we will let you know as soon as we can. The other complicating thing about this is executive session. As you think through the mechanics of executive session on a conference call or video conference, it quickly becomes obvious that there's some challenges there. So if you don't have to do executive session, why don't you avoid it for now? If there's different ways to do things or postpone a particular thing that normally you would go into executive session for, that is likely for the best. Otherwise, my suggestion to you is that whatever software you are using, I would suggest software, that you can see who is on your meeting with you, so you can identify who is a member of the board, staff, and public, so that you can have the right group of people in your executive session while exiting out members of the public. You'll also have to find a way to invite people back in after the executive session. So depending on what software you're using, you'll have different solutions for that. But just a reminder, you would not need to record the executive session. You would have to take minutes for that section because you want to keep that information confidential, so it wouldn't be part of that whole file of the recording for the entire meeting. So something to be thoughtful about. Are you sure you need that executive session? And you absolutely do. Definitely think through how mechanically you will manage that in the online or conference call setting. Next, very time-sensitive issue that we're dealing with here are library budget votes, and this is something that I really feel for everyone right now. It's not only challenging from a procedural standpoint for many libraries who have votes that were coming up in April, May, and June, but there's also a political sensitivity that trustees will need to consider as we move forward here. The economic realities of this situation, I think, are very challenging to comprehend the scope of at this point. On the governor's press conference yesterday, he was giving some numbers about the unemployment hotline and website for New York State. And he said that normally the unemployment hotline, people call to get registered for unemployment benefits, they have about 50,000 calls a week. They had 1.2 million calls in one day on Monday. They had 7 million calls all of last week. Now think of that, 50,000 compared to 7 million. We have a huge level of unemployment right now due to this issue. You're going to have different organizations that are struggling in your community. You're going to have towns and municipalities whose budgets are highly compromised by the state and federal aid situation. You're going to have businesses that may be not able to come back after this. The federal aid package is extremely generous, and one of our roles is going to be to help our business community and nonprofit community understand how to tap into that, but not everyone is going to understand it or know how to do it. So right now, the economic fears in this community, in all communities, are very, very high. So I just ask you to please be extremely sensitive when you think about your budget votes this year. What do you truly need to ask for? Do you need to ask for stuff at all this year? So be very savvy about that. Be listening very closely to what's going on in your town or school district. Make sure you are tuned in to the vibe of the community. People respect the library. They know you need money to run your operations, but we are also being hit here with an unprecedented situation that needs to be dealt with sensitively. So that being said, once determined that if you absolutely have to go this year, be aware that we've got some procedural issues for some libraries, not all. So what I wanted to do is just give you my best interpretation of what we've seen here, because literally on Monday, there was an executive order issued that relates to some budget votes that your libraries may be contending with. So for any library that had a vote coming up in April or May of 2020, it has been officially postponed until at least June 1st. So any nominating petitions that would normally be due to facilitate a trustee election, those are suspended at this time. The more complicated thing are for the libraries that don't have votes in April or May, but have votes between June and November, many of which those votes have steps, procedural steps that need to be taken now or very close to now. And that's what's got a lot of boards concerned, nervous, unsure of what to do. So this is my best interpretation at this time to help you with this. So this is by type of vote. So just a reminder, there's all different types of votes. So not everyone on this call is in the exact same boat you are. But for school district public libraries, it is extremely clear your vote is postponed until at least June 1st. So even if your legal notices went out, even if your school district isn't sure what to do, you now know your vote is postponed until at least June 1st. By education law today, you have at least until June 30th to do that vote, but that may be extended given this unique situation that we find ourselves in. So same deal with the 259 school ballot votes, which are often used by association and municipal libraries, either to fully fund their budget or to augment their budget. Some libraries have more than one type of vote. So again, 259 school ballot votes are postponed until at least June 1st, same timeline as the school district public library votes. Now, special district public libraries, as usual, you are so special. So always go back and take a look at your legislation. Find out for sure what it says in terms of the specific date. If it has a very specific date, like the second Tuesday, third Thursday of a particular month, you have no option but to use that timeline. If that date happens to be in April or May, the executive order would apply to you. Your vote would be postponed until at least June 1st. However, if you've got a date range, if you've got very little guidance on what this is, if you know your vote has to happen after June 1st, sometimes that works fine, no problem. You don't have a concern right now. But if you have legislation that allows for the vote to happen on a date that's after June 1st, but your notification timeline starts before then and is right in this April, May moment that the governor has said we will not do specific votes at that time, definitely consult your attorney on what your best bet is to do there. We can help advise you, but it would be that moment to make sure an attorney is in the mix giving you advice if that is a situation your special district library is confronted with. The 414 libraries, they're having a very tough time right now because we're only in the second year of a new timeline that's being driven by the new early voting window. So for those of you who are 414 libraries, I see the majority of people on our line here today are 414 libraries. Normally, what we're telling you now, I guess it's not the new normal yet because we're only in year 2, but the new timeline would be to do your petition drives in April and May. So your board is able to approve the petitions in June, move those on by July into the hands of your municipal clerk so they can do their work and get them to the Board of Elections by the end of July, possibly beginning of August. So right now you are in a holding pattern because you obviously cannot do a petition drive right now. You're not going to be going door to door. You're not going to be standing in front of the grocery store. Nobody wants to see you with your petition right now. So we're asking that 414 libraries consider a holding pattern at this point. That same advice of deciding whether or not 2020 is truly your year or if 2021 might be the right year to go for that vote in light of all the complications, both from an economic standpoint and a procedural standpoint. But we know some libraries just can't wait. They absolutely need that money. They've already waited a few too many years to go out for a variety of reasons. You're going to want to assess regularly where we are in this situation. It's a moving target. We're all dealing with uncertainty about the dates, and you are going to deal with that too. So possibly at the end of April, take a beat. Where are we? What does it look like? Do we think we can get petitions done? Take a beat a couple weeks after that if you thought you couldn't do it at the end of April, and Mid-Hudson's going to be here with you, helping you figure that out. So trust that you are in the same boat as other libraries, and we are completely aware of your situation. We are advocating very hard at the state level. We had to really gang up on the governor's staff just to get that executive order related for the school district timeline. So we're probably going to have to do the same thing with the 414 vote timeline as well, which we have been doing from day one. But they picked the more timely issue of the April-May window rather than the petition process for the 414. So we haven't been able to get that into an executive order at this time, but do trust that not only system directors around the state, the New York Library Association, the state library, all completely aware of the situation, working very hard to find a good solution for us moving forward. So please trust that we will get you information on that as soon as we can. As you know, the 414 vote, that we are the hometown for that here in the Mid-Hudson Library System. We have the most 414 votes of any system in the state. We literally wrote the book on how to do it, and trust that we are on the lead in advocating to find solutions for libraries that feel they absolutely must go forward this year. So please stay tuned if that's your situation. Our next issue that we wanted to touch on here is related to the CARES Act, which huge federal aid package that's come out. I want to thank the many trustees who've reached out with information, summaries, information from webinars they've gone to. We're also studying all of that stuff as best we can. Here's what we know today, and I trust that we will know more as time goes on here. But we've got $50 million that have been designated for the Institute of Museum and Library Services that will be devoted to expanding digital network access, so digital divide issues, particularly purchasing internet accessible devices and providing technical support services to communities, so possibly money for staff and how we help our communities stay connected or get connected. In Columbia and Greene County, significant challenges for school children who don't have connectivity at home but are being asked to continue schooling in that environment. A very quickly developing issue. So this was just approved literally days ago. This is the extent of the information we have about that $50 million. My guess is that this will be administered through our New York State Library. So we are on calls with them regularly as well. I will be advocating for what we know our member libraries need and making sure it is as broadly applied in our situation as possible. So that's something for all of us to keep on our radar. Now, the other things that we're all very interested in, we're currently analyzing because there's a couple of catches in a number of the programs that we've all got our eye on. So it's hard for me to give you blanket statements about some of these programs today, given the various types of libraries in our system. We don't just have association libraries. We have public entities like special district libraries, school district libraries. So this issue is definitely something that's underway, but we encourage you to learn more now. So on the COVID-19 resources page, you're going to find information about the Paycheck Protection Program program loans, the economic injury disaster loans, the employee retention payroll tax credit. These are things that might very obviously apply to your library if you are a 501c3 library. And so what that means is most likely if you're an association library, you're also designated as a tax exempt organization recognized by the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS. Many of the public libraries also have 501c3 designation, but there is a generation of libraries where the IRS refused to give public libraries 501c3 designation because they said it was quote unquote dual status, because by definition you're already government entities and therefore tax exempt. So we're going to have to advocate to see if we can get all public libraries classified under this, and that is unclear at this time. So if you're a 501c3 library, jump on this. This is you. We're going to read more about when certain conditions are met, because it's not just your eligibility, it's also does your economic situation match the requirements of the program. So you'll see some of them are pretty straightforward. The Paycheck Protection Program loans look pretty wide open for any 501c3 organization. You're going to see the economic injury disaster loans. They have certain conditions that must be met. You'll note that the one thing that's pretty clear is what your revenues were in the first quarter of this year. Were they significantly impacted by this situation? For the majority of libraries, the answer is no. But for some libraries who still rely on a great deal on fundraising, this may be your situation, and you may find a path here through that loan program. They are calling them loan programs, but there's really generous language in most of the loan programs in this act that allow the loans to be converted into grants if you use the money to retain your staff. So this is something we're going to talk about, how important it is for us to keep our staff on board at this time as much as you can, because these loans could hinge on your ability to keep your staff, to convert those so you don't have to pay back the loans. So this is something that we are definitely continuing our analysis of. We hope to have more clear FAQs available. We're going to see different organizations getting those new pieces of information out. The Council on Nonprofits, the National Council on Nonprofits, is doing an awesome job. We've got their summary sheets up on our COVID-19 page for you. There's new things coming out from chambers of commerce to help businesses and nonprofits connect with this money. We're doing our own analyses to translate those summaries for libraries. So this is definitely one to pay attention to. Stay tuned. More information is coming, and there's already some really solid information you can access now. The other aspect of this CARES Act to be promoting is that there is a charitable giving incentive, or $300. So as you know, the itemized charitable donations was done away with some of the tax reform that happened a few years ago. So they are incentivizing donors to get out there and invest private money into the nonprofit community. And libraries are certainly a smart spot for investors to choose to give that money. And so again, part of our job here is to position libraries as part of the pandemic response and recovery effort. So talking about how we are contributing, how we are helping, we're going to show you a ton of great ideas from libraries that are going on right now that should inspire people to want to invest in their local public library. But there's also many other worthy organizations in our communities, and we have to be respectful of what's going on throughout our community. And I know it can be a cutthroat game when we talk about fundraising. This is a very unique situation, and we need to make sure that how we advocate for things is respectful of that fact. So the personnel issues, which it ties into that issue of from the CARES Act, the payroll side of things. The number one thing I want to say to you here is that your staff have always been the most important asset of your library, and they should be treated as such in this situation. So I've been so really just impressed with our member library directors and the decisions you've been making at the board level to respect the situation we find ourselves in, to treat our staff with respect, to make sure they feel secure in their job retention, in their ability to do work and be paid for that work, their ability to understand that if they or their family members get sick, there is a safety net here for them financially. These are the things that I saw our directors and boards prioritize, and that was the right thing to prioritize. Our staff deserve the best we can do for them right now. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who's already made a lot of great decisions on behalf of your staff. And we want to make sure we get some very specific questions you have on this issue answered. So paid leave during closure, this was a really challenging thing right at the beginning of this crisis, because clearly we are in education law and general municipal law not supposed to pay people for work that's not getting done. And at the beginning of this, it was not clear what the workplace would look like when we all moved to working remotely. And as directors have figured that out, it's become more and more clear there is plenty of work to be done here. When there is not clear connections for a staff person to do their old job, there's plenty of new things to be focused on, including continuing education that perhaps we never had time or a space to pay them for. So what you're seeing on your screen right here is a very well done sample statement and policy that your board can use from the statewide Ask a Lawyer service, which is underwritten by the 3Rs Councils and the Public Library System Directors Organization here in New York State, of which the Mid-Hudson Library System is a member. So this is something you will get in writing through this presentation. You have access to it on our COVID-19 resources page. My advice to you is that if you have made decisions kind of on the fly, to get them in writing and vote on them, to make sure it is very clear the duration of time you are putting in paid leave for emergency closure, to make it clear that staff have a responsibility to be ready, willing, and able to work remotely on projects in order to be paid. Staff, we have some staff who have, it's not clear that they were ready to do this kind of work and have decided to take some time off during this period. That needs to be their choice, not forced, if at all possible in your situation. So creating this opportunity for our staff to be working while the library doors are closed to the facility, this is our responsibility as managers and the governing bodies of our organizations to make sure that work is there for them and that we are able to keep them paid during this time. So again, if you have not adopted an emergency closure policy or a pandemic policy, whatever you happen to have called it, and have just made some decisions and communicated them verbally or via email, get it into a written policy. Sample language is here for you on that front. And then your director is working extremely hard to make sure the workload for those staff is there to justify that payment at the other end of this crisis that we find ourselves in. So we wanted to share with you some ideas for how to keep those staff busy, and I'm going to do that in a minute. But the other thing we have to put in front of you right now is the fact that there have been two major changes in paid sick leave in light of the coronavirus. So in terms of keeping staff paid, there's also that safety net now that has been strengthened quite a bit should a staff member be diagnosed with the coronavirus or have family members diagnosed, in which they become the primary caregiver for them. So there's, again, information on COVID-19, the Mid-Hudson COVID-19 resource page, but you're going to want to be very cautious and careful as we work through this issue, and Mid-Hudson's working to create some summary documents for you. There's two things at play here, actually three things at play. The existing Family Medical Leave Act, the existing Paid Family Leave Act from New York State, and then these two layers have been added on top of that related to mandatory paid sick leave. It's been expanded at both the state and federal level, and it applies in different ways depending on how many employees you have and if you're a association library or what's deemed a public sector employee, which is our public libraries. So we're not going to take a deep dive on this today. We would need a whole hour just to do that, but we are working towards that to be able to help you with that. But you'll see summaries with the basics information for what it means for each of those four categories of public employer, 10 or fewer employees. That is all laid out for you in the resources we have on the midhudson.org COVID-19 resource page. We'll be talking and taking a deeper dive on this issue with our directors briefings in the coming weeks. So again, just something to be aware of if you find yourself in the unfortunate situation of having staff that are diagnosed with COVID-19 or find themselves with family members suffering from the virus. So the other issue we want to make really clear before we dive into what people are doing at home is if your facility is closed, you need to limit on-site access to that facility. The work from home orders very clearly, at least 50% of staff are supposed to be home. The orders for 75 and 100% of staff to work from home did not include political subdivisions. Some people are interpreting that as to not mean public libraries, but the intent is pretty clear that physical distancing is the order of the day. And most most of our library buildings don't allow for the adequate physical distancing necessary to have staff in the building at this time. So I'm pretty confident to say that 99% of our libraries have the majority of their staff at home at this time, with limited exceptions. So there's some things that just have to get done in the facility. You need maintenance of that building to make sure, there's no flooding from the hot water heater, or the HVAC system hasn't broken down, or there's not a broken window. There needs to be a physical on-site inspection on a regular basis. You may have a situation in which your accounting software is only accessible in the building, or you can only issue checks from the building. So those are things that are acceptable to have a staff person go in and do, picking up the mail, making sure bills are getting paid. These types of things are reasonable to have 1 or 2 staff people in the building to handle, but you should have in writing the expectations. If people are in the building, I would strongly encourage you to have a buddy system so no one is in there by themselves. And if someone is in there by themselves, they are checking in when they arrive and when they depart with someone who is knowledgeable about that building as well. So again, in writing is going to be important to protect the library from any liability issues in the future. So remote work assignments, our directors have been so diligent and hard at work at this. I wanted just to share with you, this is a quick and kind of dirty summary of all the things I know are going on. I know there's a lot of other stuff that I wasn't able to capture before today's briefing, but most libraries, they've rolled over their phone line and they've got their staff working in shifts to answer questions, answer emails, do chat reference. We are still serving as that trusted resource for information, to solve problems, to research issues, to get factual information, or just to figure out, is my book due or not? People are still hungry to connect with you or your library staff. So we're seeing tons of libraries who have a voice over IP phone system be able to easily roll those calls over to the online, the remote working environment. Other libraries are using Google Voice to roll over those numbers to other numbers of staff that are working from home. Online program production has just exploded. I gotta encourage you to go check out some of the stuff that's going on, from story time to book discussions, scavenger hunts, homework help. The Tivoli Library had a Bollywood dance class last night. Some very cool stuff is happening online. And we have a big program coming up with a great number of people from our library signed up to hear from Courtney Wimmers, our outreach and community engagement specialist, who's going to be talking about best practices, making sure we are clear on copyright laws when it comes to storytime books that we choose to read, things to consider when it comes to production, which platforms are working well for people, hearing from libraries that are doing great work in this area. So this has been one of the kind of silver linings of the situation, is watching the innovation and creativity of library staff across the system and honestly across the country, as we all figure out how to move our really critical services that speak to early literacy, digital literacy needs, and delivering those services in new ways. We're seeing libraries doing one-on-one tech assistant appointments, from being on the phone with someone and walking them through how to set up a device they've never used before, or troubleshoot problems they're having with their email. The Garrison Library is actually doing video appointments, so you can see each other's faces and help people through something. So those same services, for the most part, that we were delivering that don't involve our physical collection are still happening, and that takes staff time, energy, and I think focus to make those things happen. The other huge things that are going on are the promotion of the e-resources to make sure our communities know what we have to offer. That's always been an area that public libraries have struggled with. It's something that people are still surprised when you tell them that you can get an ebook or an e-magazine or take an online class through the library. We are delighting literally hundreds, if not thousands, of residents who didn't realize we had those services because of this situation. So making the most of that and shifting some of the budgeted money for print collection into developing the digital collection, or getting a postcard out to every resident, because one of the important things to remember is not everyone in your community is online. Tons of people in your community are not comfortable online, don't even have a computer at home, but they're still hungry to connect. So really having the mantra that physical distancing should not mean social isolation. That should be the calling card of our libraries right now. Just this week, we started seeing libraries making proactive phone calls, not waiting for them to call you, but calling them. And we've got libraries calling their card holders. We've got libraries partnering with senior centers to call on people who may be in need. I spoke to a library director earlier today who started this program just yesterday and ended up calling one of their older patrons, who, when they got on the line with her, she actually started to cry because she said she was 2 days from not having enough food and she was too afraid to go to the grocery store and she didn't know what to do. And the library came to the rescue. They figured out what agency could get to that person and help her out. So when we think about the critical needs that are out there in our community right now, libraries are part of the response right now. We have to be smart about how we deploy our resources. So a production of a mailer to all residents, because we cannot assume people are on social media. We can't assume they're going to get your email message, but they need to know the library is still here and working really hard for them. This is a lot of work, and it's work that your people can be doing from home in a great deal. So in terms of people who are struggling to figure out what to have their staff do, there's plenty of ideas here. There's also tons of continuing education available to your staff at this time, from the Mid-Hudson Library System, from the Public Library Association, from the New York Library Association. Casey just sent out a Learn from Your Desk message, which he does every month. But this month, I think, was probably 2 or 3 times as long as usual because there's so much being offered for your staff. So again, making sure that it's important that your staff has stuff to do, that they're doing stuff that matters, whether it's serving the community directly, increasing their professional development and acumen and producing services and great customer service for your community. Tons of stuff to have staff doing from home at this point. I just saw a question come in about the online programming and a release being necessary, and I'm going to do a little interpretation here. One, related to your physical programming, if you're doing exercise classes or that Bollywood dance class, a release form, just like you would do for your physical classes in the building, yes, that makes sense too. Your story time copyright issues is something Courtney's going to talk about in her online program later, but just a shout out to all of the generous authors who have given their permission. Just remember, they might not actually own the rights to their own work, and that's a whole nother discussion for another day, but it may be the publisher that has to give that permission. So Courtney's been gathering all the different publishers who have been giving that permission and posting that on our resources page to make sure staff are making good choices that both respect artists' rights and don't get the library in trouble. This was a chat I saw last night from Thea, who's the director at the Claverack Library. This was posted on Facebook, someone who got one of those proactive phone calls from the staff at the Claverack Library, and how much they appreciated that call. And I just had to share the little comment at the end that they're checking on the old people, right? It's not just our old people that need for us to be connecting with them. Our senior community has a varying degree of need. Some of our most tech-savvy people are our retirees in our community, and sometimes it's not. So making sure we treat everyone equally and with respect, and get to not only the senior citizen community, but also families that might be struggling with the new online education situations they find themselves in. They are very needful of not only structured days in which their kids are engaged with things that is going to be partially done by the school, but partially done by libraries as education institutions that are producing programming that's quality, that contributes to education and creates a sense of community as we move through this situation. I just, honestly, I've been saving pictures the whole month of all the cool things our libraries are doing. This is a small fraction of what I've collected so far. I just wanted to show you just the great communication, the engagement level of libraries in our system. We're seeing craft projects being done at Kinderhook, a scavenger hunt being done at Kinderhook, great signage using your sandwich boards out front of the library. We're seeing more people take walks than ever before through our town. So if you're in a destination that is walkable, how are you using your signage to get the word out? That's a great thing to be thinking about. Desmond Fish Library down in Putnam County, awesome job getting their staff online and visible to people, booking appointments with them to help them with tech support, doing online story times, promotion of your Wi-Fi, making sure people understand that the Wi-Fi is on, what the limitations of that are for people, getting trusted information out to people from the CDC and the World Health Organization. The Highland Library has been methodically getting very factual information into the hands of people and myth busting some of the crazy stuff we're hearing out there. So just a thought here about what our role is. Not much has changed outside of the fact our physical collection is not accessible to people. We've got to be creative in how we do it, but we have an awful lot to offer people that is essential to their lives right now. So I just saw a question come through I wanted to hop back on. I saw someone asking about the question related to, let's see, just getting back down here to the issue of having people in the building. Someone said, we thought the building had to be completely closed. Completely closed to the public, absolutely. But again, there's going to be some things that you might need a person to get back into the library to check on the physical nature of the building. Is it okay? You don't want a flood sitting there. You don't want some type of unsafe situation not dealt with. And again, there may be things that you can only do from the building, perhaps accessing your accounting software or issuing checks. Different libraries have different situations for how they manage that. So I'm sorry I can't speak in a blanket way about that, but I just wanted to let you know if there's essential services that can only be done at the library, you could have your director go back in that building if necessary, the bookkeeper go back in if necessary, but you must respect the physical distancing intent of all of these executive orders. The whole idea here is public safety, public health. That needs to come before even mission at this point. So when you're making decisions, just keep that lens in mind for how you make those decisions. So oddly enough, we're getting tons of questions about how to get back to normal. I'm sure we would all love to be planning that very concretely right now. But something to be thinking about is the date by which we closed our libraries was not dictated to us until we had really ramped down a great deal in terms of who was working from home. The governor went from orders of, let's social distance if we can, to saying 25% of the workforce had to go home, and then in quick succession, 50%, 75, 100% of people. He's already talking about how do we reopen everything. And this is going to have some implications for libraries. So at Mid-Hudson, our staff is doing a lot of very focused logistical planning on how we help libraries restart everything, from managing the hold shelf to making sure they understand what the rules are going to be surrounding gatherings of people. So understanding that the day you reopen the library might not be 100% the way it looked before this whole situation began is important. There's things we need to think about before we open our buildings. There's going to be cleaning for your building. We've got the information from the Department of Health posted on our resource page for COVID-19. There's information coming out from the CDC. There's a great recorded webinar to bust a lot of myths that are out there about the level of disinfecting and cleaning that has to happen. We need to become experts at this. So you'll see more and more fine-tuned information about that in addition to what's already out there, which is very good. You're going to be possibly dealing still with physical distancing requirements when the building reopens. So having a plan in place is something we're going to be working with your directors on, of what does that look like to reopen in this environment, both by cross-referencing what's being told to us by public health officials and the state, as well as library operational issues from the Sierra software situation, the Mid-Hudson delivery logistics. All of those things need to be built into a logistical plan that may result in your library having a soft opening before a grand opening. So yet another thing for us to think about as we get to that very hopeful day where things look more normal than they do today. So I want to make sure we stop here and address the other questions that have come up. Someone's asking me here to go back to another issue that had came up about the people in the building. And a good point here by Tracy from East Fishkill, there can also be insurance ramifications about your building be abandoned for a length of time. So making sure people are checking on that building at the very least is a reason to have someone go over there and take a look and make sure everything's okay. Some libraries have security systems that help them do that remotely. Most libraries do not. So that physical inspection on a regular basis is important. So another question here related to open meetings law, relating to the requirement of the public's participation. Yes, the public does still have to be able to hear or see the meeting as it's happening in real time, in addition to the recording and the later transcription of that meeting. So just a reminder to pick a platform in which is something you can advertise. So if someone wants to come in to that meeting and listen just like they could in person, that's still possible during the conference call or video conferencing setting. So I know in a crisis situation, there is the temptation to just, start doing things ad hoc and making decisions in ways that you wouldn't normally during this situation. But please keep in mind, they've not completely blown apart the open meetings law. They've just made the law more flexible for you to create that physical distancing requirement that we're all dealing with right now. So same rules apply for public notice, public attendance in the online environment, taking minutes, publishing those minutes on a 2-week timeline. All of those things are still unplaced. The major differences are that you can now have those meetings completely online and by conference call. The public still has to have the right to attend, and just that final clarification that your minutes do not count as that transcription. So making sure we're really clear on that. So someone's asking me also about what the state issue guidelines for cleaning standards before a library can reopen. I would point you to the Department of Health standards right now. I think that will be a very good indication of what would be expected of cleaning the library. Some of our directors immediately did some research about, are we going to need to have a deep cleaning, company come in and do this work? And so far the answer seems to be no. That with general cleaning practices, following the guidelines issued by the state, it should be able to be complied with your normal cleaning personnel, whether that be in-house or a third-party company that you hire to come in and do the cleaning for your building. So far, it looks like you'll still be able to use those mechanisms, but you'll want to make sure your cleaning protocols match those issued by the state health department, which your directors are very aware of and is available on the resources page that's available to you. Okay. I think I know many of you on this call, but for those of you who don't know me, I want you to know that we are here for you. If you have questions, we're going to help you get answers. If we don't have the answers, trust me, we will do the research to help you figure things out. My contact information is there at the bottom. My staff's contact information is on our website. Our job is to help you. And as best we can, that's what we're doing right now. As you can tell, a lot of work has gone into the past few weeks, not only from your directors and staff and yourselves, but here at the system. So all I can say to you is thank you so much for all you're doing. I know you are volunteers, and you could be choosing anything to be doing with your time right now except this. And it's so fantastic that you are sticking with your library and doing what's right and helping your neighbors connect with library services during a really challenging time. So I know we don't all have the answers and know exactly what to do now, but I hope today gave you some more certainty that you've been going in the right direction, that you have some more legal guidance on some of those tough issues that are out there, that you see where the aid potential is, particularly if the state budget predictions are worse than we think. All of these things are not easy. So I just want to again say thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and for the service that you have always given to your public library. It makes a big difference in people's lives. And I hope you are feeling very good about your service to your library right now, because it's making a big difference in the face of things that are really uncertain for people right now. So as always, I will end today by saying thank you. You guys are heroes in my book for the work that you do on behalf of your community, and we're proud to help you and support you through this time. So I'm sure I'll be talking to you again soon. Be well, and I just wish the best for you and your families.